I've always been fascinated by objects that looked like something that they weren't. For example, in a furniture store, you'd sometimes find a mock-up of a computer on top of a desk made out of cardboard, but realistic enough to fool you into thinking it was the real thing. Or those fruit made out of wax that little kids sometimes take a bite out of because they look so realistic. So when I was looking for some new ideas for my box book, Creative Wooden Boxes from the Scroll Saw, making something out of wood, like a box, a cupcake box, was a natural. Actually, the idea came from my editor, who challenged me with it. I had no idea how to go about it at first, but I figured I'd give it a go. And the result were these cupcakes, which here I've iced in vanilla, chocolate, and butterscotch. But you can make it out of lemon or whatever flavors you want. Right? The box is constructed in two parts. First you have the base that's made using two different size Forstner bits. I decided to use a Forstner bit so that you could make a whole bunch of these very, very quickly. A slightly larger one forms the rim, and a smaller one forms the base, and the little hole that's left by the middle of the bit is cleverly covered with a piece of velvet. Now, you're not limited to a piece of velvet if you're trying to think of good uses for a box of this size. By borrowing from my ring box, I took out the insert, this was another of the projects in the book, and putting it in this one. I created a box that could be used for a wedding ring or an engagement ring. To compensate for the shallowness of this is a very small ring, and that fits in nicely. And there are instructions in the book for making really professional looking inserts out of foam core and velvet. That was another thing I played with and is really very, very useful. And high-end ring boxes are really wonderful projects for sales. If you want a ring that's bigger, the lid can be drilled into. There are ways of adapting it, which gives you a little bit more headroom, so you could put an engagement ring in, and that certainly would be something innovative. All right, if you wanted to have a box that was deeper, you could do it conventionally and cut out an inner ring and have an add-on base, but that's a lot more work. All right, now the other part of the box is the lid, or the icing part, and that's constructed from circles. To save wood, I used 3 circles, cut out the centers, and these are stacked and beveled to give you an icing effect. And what I'm going to do is to go over all of the steps, because some of them were new techniques that I created, as for example making the ridges of this, which was the result of several failed experiments, or designer firewood as we call it. I'll walk you through the steps and you'll see how quick and easy these boxes really are. In fact, you'll find probably the toughest part of it is making these fidgety little sprinkles, which are also made out of wood, and these are applied as you would apply real sprinkles. A coat of lacquer to make it tacky, and then you quickly put on the little sprinkles and an additional coat to help seal it. So since obviously I can't do the woodworking in my kitchen, although this is a nice counter for display, we're going to go into my garage shop and I'll show you how to go about doing this. We're going to start by making the base of the cupcake. Here's a finished base, and here's what the base looks like before it's finished. We start by taking the 3.5-inch square of wood, 1 3/8 inch thick, and drilling 2 holes in it with Forstner bits. The first hole is drilled right at the center of the blank with a 2-inch Forstner bit, and it's drilled 1/8 of an inch thick. The reason we do 1/8 of an inch is that it will allow for the lid liner to sit nicely in the recess. All right, then, keeping the wood in the same position, we use the 1.5-inch Forstner bit and drill down an additional 3/4 of an inch for a total depth of 7/8 inches. We then attach the pattern, cutting out the middle so we can position it properly, and we're going to cut along the perimeter to form the slanted sides of the cupcake base. I have my saw table set at 20 degrees, tilted left side down, and I'm going to cut around the base in a clockwise direction, which means I feed the wood counterclockwise so the blade looks as though it's going clockwise. And here is the completed cupcake. So the next thing we're going to do is to go over to the vertical belt sander, which I've set up with the table tilted at 20 degrees to sand it smooth. I've set the table at a 20-degree angle, and what I'm going to do is to rotate it at that 20-degree angle until the sides are nice and straight. As you can see, this is now nice and smooth. You probably noticed that it looked very rough before. This piece of wood was a little harder than I expected and gave me a rough time, but by patient sanding you get rid of all of this, and you have your inner rings that you can use as a guide. If these inner rings are even, at worst your cupcake may be a little narrower than you expected, but it will look just fine and no one will know how it was supposed to start out. The next step will be to cut the ridges in the side of the cupcake. I now have the nicely sanded cupcake base, which I'll bet you never thought was going to look this good after it came off the scroll saw. And we're going to cut the indentations in the sides to make it look like this one. To do that, we're going to use a number 7 spiral blade, which I've put into my saw. The spiral blade does not come with flat ends, so you may do a little jockeying to get it in, but it will go even if you have to flatten the ends, and is the quickest and easiest way to get the effect that I want. I attached to the bottom of the cupcake base a pattern of 20 segments. I attached it with repositionable adhesive, centering it, and I also, to help, I extended the line just over the edge to make it easier to see. The table is left at the same 20-degree angle that it was to cut the base, but this time I'm going to put the cupcake on the right side of the blade over here, and the motion is going to push in gently, then I'm going to push it back toward the back of the saw, and then pull it back to the right. It's a smooth motion, it's in, back, and out, goes very quickly, and that will give you perfectly lined up ridges. And here, as you can see, we have our ridges. And this completes the bottom of the cupcake box.